I'm Ash Minnick, and this is Club Auspex, the very first episode of Club Auspex, so I know you're probably wondering what that is. In Vampire the Masquerade, Auspex is the power of seeing the unseen, delving into the unknown, and so we're going to take just maybe about 15 minutes to do that with our players of New York by Night. So with me today, I have Alexander Ward and Aabria Iyengar. Hey, y'all.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome. Thanks so much for joining me.
It's nice to be in the club.
It's a different type of club than I usually go to.
You know, we can talk about that. We can get into that.
Club life? Yes, please.
Well, just like Auspex, so as you develop that power more, you're able to get deeper and see more. And so we're gonna kind of do that, where we're gonna go deeper. But we're gonna start with the obvious.
Okay, hold on. Ash, I'm going to stop you here. My character has unswayable mind. Can I leave?
No.
Okay.
That's.
Hey, I got to shoot my shot.
No, you did. You did a good job.
Thank you.
So this is our very first Club Auspex. How do y'all feel to be like the first guest?
The guinea pigs of Club Auspex.
I mean, I wasn't thinking of it like that, but yeah,
yeah,
sure.
no,
sure.
it's interesting. From previous shows we've done in the World of Darkness, we've had a lot of questions that we haven't really had time or the ability to answer. So this is going to be hopefully a nice thing that we get to do of answering some questions that
I hope so too.
are a little I don't know. Yeah, it's great to be here.
I don't know why you quit on that. That was a beautiful sentiment.
I don't know.
Yeah. It was so good.
I feel like it should have a cool lead-in phrase though, just as like Jason has every episode. You know, I feel like Club Auspex also needs its like.
Yeah.
And you guys are the first guests, so you have to make it up.
Shit. You don't want this.
No, I don't.
No. Club Auspex.
I don't know. Show me your mind.
Kind of. You know what? I like it. It's a direct challenge.
Yeah, there you go.
Show me your mind.
Show me your mind. Okay.
You have to you cannot blink while you say it.
Oh, I'm not great at that. Not blinking.
She's really good at blinking. Is
She's
how you
so good at
I'm so good at
Reframe
blinking.
that. You're amazing at blinking.
Wait, okay, hold on. What are we here to talk about?
Yes.
No, I'll keep doing this
Are
forever.
you ready to show me your mind?
Yes.
All right.
Great.
Let's start with the
We'll
obvious.
workshop that later.
The first impressions. So, Alex, Jasper is very different than Isaac.
Yes.
You've been playing Jasper now for 5 seasons.
Yeah.
And so what was sort of the biggest obvious differences, the biggest subtle differences? What was difficult about switching gears? Was it difficult?
Yeah, it was. Jasper was made at a very different time in my life. There's a lot of backstory that goes into that of like why I made him and what was feeding him at the time. And as I played Jasper, it got a lot more difficult to play Jasper because I wasn't in the same emotional space as I was when I was creating him. There's a lot. I won't go into all that, but like I wanted to make Isaac be very different than Jasper, both visually and as a person. And Jasper had a lot of internal conflict and a lot of bad impulses that he was trying to make better in possibly the worst way he could have done it. And so I wanted to make a character that was much less internally conflicted and much more okay with himself. Mm-hmm. Whether or not he's a good person is not the point. It's that he's totally okay with whatever he does. And he comes from a very different background and has a very different relationship to the world around him and doesn't, as far as right now, as of episode 1, does not hate being a kindred. And it actually fits him a little better. So that's kind of what I wanted to explore with Isaac.
All right. Yeah. And then Aabria, you are new, at least to the official sort of vampire streaming world. What are your first impressions coming into the table? Like, how is this different than other games you've streamed?
Oh, it's fun because I definitely started as a fan of LA by Night. So yeah, look, I'm here to let you know that the parasocial come up has been unreal of watching all these stories. And when I was this was sort of fundamental viewing as I was learning about RPGs and learning that you could tell different kinds of stories with different kinds of tone. And I think it was so fun to come in here and settle into a tone that was just so deeply different from everything else. I like jokes and definitely feel very like improvisational and like light. Is usually like my tone and timbre, but coming in here and like there's a cadence that's set and a mood that's set really well that it feels heavy in this really nice way.
Yeah.
Not oppressive, but like a weighted blanket that you're like, you are secure in the like world affirming this like set of emotions that the mechanics want you to like go through and explore. And it's just, I mean, we're only an episode in, but it already feels so fun and interesting to like dig into the kind of character that hopefully you guys will see over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting because so much of improv in a generalized sense and people's perception of improv is related to comedy.
Yeah.
And being spontaneous, being funny, and having to improv with, I mean, obviously there's still jokes in the world of darkness. There's still funny things that happen, but like coming at it from a dramatic perspective and not every decision being like, what's going to make my friends laugh, what's going to make the audience laugh, is a very different thing. And I've noticed playing Vampire for so long now as my main RPG, when I go into something that is more lighthearted and stuff like that, I have a hard time making that switch, especially the way we do it where we're in character most of the time, and most tables aren't that way.
Yeah.
Going in and being like, it takes a minute to be like, okay, like switch that gear. That bar has been rusted over here for a while now, and I have to like break it over, and like it's really interesting.
And that is so true. So much of the perception of improvisation is that it's all comedy, but my favorite improv is long form narrative improv, and it's, you know, improvising a story is fascinating and wonderful, and I feel like there's not a lot of that done well, and Vampire is one of the rare places you get to see it.
Well, it is partially the mechanics do encourage that. It encourages that way of playing, which is great.
So let's get a little bit deeper, a little bit more into the subtle. So that was your first impression. Let's get, so with your characters, y'all guys have a bunch of stuff going on. So Margot, Fuego, what's that about?
Look, okay. So I
got two names. What's that about?
I've got several names. This is probably like my favorite little shout out to just being a person of color coming into the space where for whatever reason, I don't know if it's like by virtue of like sports or just family and like friend stuff, I always grew up with like a nickname, and then you're like, people that didn't know you well would call you like your government name, and then everyone else would call you this like sort of other name. So she immediately started off by saying like, that was her, that was Margot's opening volley to the group was, you can call me Fuego. She's trying to establish like a friendly pattern. And then later when she was asked what her name was, she'll answer like her real name, Margot. But that idea of like growing up with a name that like feels as much your real name as like the one you were like given when you were born.
Maybe it is even more your real name.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, because it's usually so tied to like a big, strong emotion. Like you're gonna yell Fuego when you're laughing with your friends, or when you've done something weird, or when you get lost in Club Auspex and you have to like find your friend and go home.
Already lost.
Already lost. But I just wanted to like shout out that like little cultural thing.
That's awesome. I like that.
Alex, Isaac is so polite. That's like he's I don't know. He's like a dapper vampire man.
Well,
what's that about?
So there is a thing, and actually we were talking about this before the cameras were on, and I just realized an answer to the question. One of my favorite things about vampire lore, as the concept of vampires through all literature and all forms of media, is there is a weird tie-in to politeness with vampires, especially going back to like, you know, all the things that like, there's a weird sort of consensualness to vampires, and and etiquette plays into it. I mean, there's the scene in Francis Coppola's Dracula where, you know, Jonathan Harker is sitting at the table and he offends Dracula, and all of a sudden Dracula goes from being so polite to immediately flying off the handle because there was a rejection of his, you know, etiquette. And that's always something I found really interesting with vampires, so I kind of wanted to explore that in Isaac, and that ties in very heavily to Clan Tzimisce, have a lot of that built into them, so that's why I wanted to play that clan.
That brings us to the next level. Let's talk about your clans. Okay. So you are Clan Tzimisce.
Yes.
That is it.
Yes, Tzimisce. Yeah.
Tzimisce.
That we haven't.
A lot of people say it differently. They're wrong. It's Tzimisce.
Oh my God. The energy. I love it.
Okay. All right. You heard it here first. You're wrong. So Tzimisce, we haven't seen a lot, or maybe any of
Any
Tzimisce's
as
clan
far
yet?
as I remember, yeah.
Yeah. So why?
Tzimisce has always been my favorite clan ever since I started playing Vampire in high school. I never got a chance to play one, but they were always my favorite. They were difficult to work into stories in older editions of Vampire because they're bananas. And the earlier editions have a lot of, there was some stuff that was like, it just made things difficult. So with the companion for V5 that came out that introduced Ravnos, Salubri, and Tzimisce, it's brought them into a way that is much easier to work them into a modern story.
Okay.
And having them always have been my favorite clan, I really wanted to play one. And the reason they are my favorite is that they have, as I said before, a lot of tie-ins with the politeness and etiquette, but also they have the duality of having that politeness and etiquette while being physical monsters, and in the difference that Jasper was a physical monster because he was unfortunately cursed to look a certain way, Tzimisce are monsters because they choose to change their form, and they choose to make themselves more monstrous as they go and learn. And so that's something I wanted to explore with the fact that all vampires are monsters, but there is a specific set of vampires that choose to make themselves the monster they are on the inside on the outside, instead of being cursed to show their monster on the outside.
And I'm going to tie this back to what you said in the very beginning, which was that when you created Jasper, it was because you related to something in that character. I think it's interesting, the idea of a character you played before that was forced to be a certain way, and now you're playing a character that creates how they are.
Yeah.
And so is that kind of an Alex arc?
It might be.
Ooh, the growth arc.
Oh. So Ventru, a clan I clearly know nothing about.
Nothing.
I would love to know what drew you to Ventru, like why that was the clan you wanted to dive into for your first foray, but also, let me answer that first, and then I've got a follow-up.
Okay.
Follow-up.
I have a silly answer and a real answer. My silly answer is B-Dave played Ventru, and I mean, so did you, but I did assume that all black people were Ventru in Vampire. So that was my understanding. I later found out that wasn't the case and chose it anyway. No, my actual answer is sort of thinking about what we use for monsters and like analogs in fiction for the thing that we are scared about at any given point in time. Zombies made sense like in the 60s when we were worried about like, it doesn't matter. I don't have to give a big long answer, but I think the thing that like we talk about rallying against and what we consider monstrous as people now in society are like big systems of power that are constantly like thrown against us. Like we talk about railing against capitalism and billionaires and like those things that are just sort of insurmountable like bastions of power, which is why when we talk about when you play Vampire, you are playing a monster. I want to play a thing that resonates with me as what I consider monstrous, which is a singular, sort of unassailable source of power. And Ventru appealed to me, like, in that right away. And then it became fun to build work backwards and build a character that would always be sort of balancing individual power versus like what her clan draws her to and like what her self-actualization is versus like what the beast is calling her towards. And that's actually what drew me to the Ventru.
You actually segued into my follow-up question, which is just that the Ventru clan is such a source of power, and I feel like Margot isn't necessarily projecting that quite yet. What is your feeling on where she is at with the power of the Ventru and kind of?
I loved building a character that was locked out of her sort of birthright and is going to come to it the more she interacts with the world and finds herself. And that can be a story that's like incredibly personal. It's also not to make everything about like sort of cultural things, but I think that like resonates really hard with me as like a black woman in America right now. That like feeling locked away from like sources of community and industry and like feeling like the world is sort of trying to keep you from being the truest version of yourself. I think it's absolutely wonderful that like she begins just so deeply removed from all of that and will find it in her ways, and if she like comes up and meets more Ventru or just other like kindred in general. And like that arc is the thing I'm actually most excited about playing and finding.
That's awesome. And that also, so in delving deeper, mind reading, as you were. So in your character creation, you've got sort of poles. You've got these dramatic poles, which I know you and I are familiar with.
Yep.
For those of you at home, Aabria and I we did a show, Endymion's Gate. Very beginning of the pandemic, we were all locked at home and we're like, we gotta do something. And it was Hill Folk System. It's very dramatic poles, but I'm seeing that in Margot a lot, and we're exploring especially the difference between how she dealt with Richter versus the thugs.
Yeah.
So in your character creation process, was that very important to you to sort of create that struggle with her?
100%. And it's truly because we played that I'm like, oh, every character now has to be built with this idea of like, they will land in one of two very different but equally viable and interesting places. So it was very easy for Margot to like, to kind of go like, does she like follow the party line, or does she like fight as hard as she can to be this sort of self-conception of a person? Sorry, to go on one more big rant. I'll do this forever, and I'm so sorry.
Because that's why we're here.
Cut it all out. I think it's fun that we're playing such young kindred, because as people, like when we were still alive, we're so like fundamentally like influenced by popular culture. And it was very fun building Margot and realizing the thing that she would have thought of right after being embraced was she wouldn't have seen this as a curse. We're living in the world where like the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a thing. Like when you are given a certain bizarre gift, you can use it to like be a hero and elevate your community and save the world. And I think it's so fun to have that like contextual understanding of a character, while the system at every important moment reminds you like, no, you're a monster. Mm-hmm. So it's fun to play that idea of like balancing what you're, as a character, you think you're capable of doing. I can be a hero for my community, for my world. And knowing that you're always staring down the pipeline of like, you're a monster, and you will always end up as the worst version of what you think you are. Oof. And that's, you're like, there's no way of getting out. If you live long enough, you will become the beast. Yeah. And it's such a beautiful space to play in as you're discovering who you are as a kindred. And yeah.
Well, that's something that I love about this game in general, is because like while like something like Dungeons and Dragons encourages you to get more powerful, it encourages you to, you start off low powered, but the solution to all your problems is getting more powerful.
Yes.
This is not, the solution to your problems is not getting more powerful in Vampire. I love starting off as a low powered vampire, a low generation vampire, because you're more closely connected to the world around you, but also you have these abilities that seem insane at the time. And then as you grow, you get more and more abilities. You get these things that only cause you to have more problems. Yeah. Because your solutions become, this thing I can call on it to fix this problem, and it just makes it so much worse. Yeah. And I love that very much about this game.
So good.
With Isaac, how much of who that character was did you know before versus at the table? Who did you find at the table?
Oh, the thing with me is when I have a hard time, like I know who the character is, I know what they want, what their mood is, what they feel about stuff, but I never know how they sound until I sit down. I can never pinpoint what the voice is for a character until I sit down and do it, because I have a million ideas of what influence could be. What could sound like this, it could sound like this, and then I open my mouth when we sit down at the table. It's always not what I thought it was going to be. And it was the same with Jasper. It was the same with everything. And I have to now just let that be a thing, because I can't pinpoint it until I sit down at the table. I had no idea Isaac was going to sound like that until I opened my mouth in that first scene.
And when you did sound like that, when you found him, were you like,
I was like, oh, that's it. That's what he sounds like. Like that was, and then from then on, that mode of speech and the cadence and everything influences the character from where I started. Because I only plan a character up until the first session. I know nothing about his future, because that hasn't happened yet. I don't plan for what's going to happen to a character. I write what has happened, because that's what I know.
All right.
So anything that happens from session one, I have not planned, and I have specifically and repeatedly asked Jason to tell me as little as possible.
Well, then I suppose for our final and fifth level, it's we can't go deeper because you don't know where the character's going.
I don't.
We can't astrally project to the character's future. Let's jump out a bit to y'all as people to close it off real quick. what brought you to Vampire at the very beginning? Like, what got you interested in Vampire, and then how excited are you as people at this table, like, exploring that interest?
You have to answer this first.
I
You
have
have to. You have to.
Okay. I always loved vampires as a kid. We were talking about this before. I can't remember exactly what my first piece of vampire media was, but I always loved vampires. They were always my favorite. Of the universal monsters, they were my favorite. And I also there's a lot I love about vampires. What draws me to vampires specifically is the idea that vampires are the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing. They are this thing that looks human and is literally the farthest thing from human. That it appeals to me. I think it creates interesting stories, and I also love that they are a malleable thing, and there's so many examples of it in the world of darkness, and that vampires are so different. That all the clans are different, they all have different abilities, but it's also showcased in the legends of vampires from around the world. Every culture has a radically different idea of what a vampire is. There's so many different examples of just crazy things that are just, this is what our vampire is, this is what this is what, there's so many different, and I love that it is a creature that is, in so many different cultures, is wildly different from each other. And that is a rarity among, the monsters of our imaginations, is that they're so wildly differ. But this game specifically, of Vampire, I love. It was the first tabletop RPG I ever played in high school was Vampire. I played Dark Ages Vampire, and I loved it. And we played through most of my teenage years, and then I didn't play again until we started LA by Night, and I'm so excited to be playing again because I love this game very, very much.
Twilight.
I hate you.
Ha ha ha. And that's Club Auspex. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. I feel like, the opening phrase, are you guys still happy with it?
I guess, I don't know.
Show me
I can
your
remember
mind.
that far in the past.
Show me your mind. I think your minds have been shown. So, yeah. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time at Club Auspex.